Good evening and welcome to this November edition of the Australian-New Zealand Women's Human Rights Campaign. My name is Janet Fraser and I'm a volunteer with the Feminist Legal Clinic in Exile. Our principal solicitor, Anna Kerr, is trying to do the techie work tonight, but the internet is a fickle beast. So thank you to Anna when you managed to make it. I live and work on Darug and Gundungurra Nurra outside of Sydney. Wherever you're coming from this evening, we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations across the continent. Tonight we'll be dealing with Article 8, the elimination of violence against women. To fight violence against women and girls, single-sex victim support services, including rape crisis centres and domestic violence shelters, should remain single-sex. In order to create effective policies to eliminate sex-based violence, we need accurate data and statistics about who the victims and perpetrators are, including their sex. Tonight's material has the potential to be particularly triggering to survivors of violence, so please be gentle with yourself and others. Jeanne Sarson and Linda MacDonald live on Mi'kmaq territory, and we are deeply grateful for them coming to us at 4 a.m. Canadian time. They are Canadian feminists, retired public health nurses, independent activists, researchers and scholars with a just released book, Women Unsilenced, Our Refusal to Let Torturer Traffickers Win. They have spent the past 28 years as grassroots supporters of women who have survived non-state torture, trafficking, and other forms of sexualized exploitation perpetrated within intimate relationships. Their work is national and international, and they have been contacted by women from many countries, including Australia and New Zealand. They have given expert testimony to their government, worked with NGOs worldwide on the violence of non-state torture perpetrated against women and girls, and have been actively engaged in sessions at the UN in New York, Geneva, and Vienna since 2004, advocating for the need for torture by non-state actors to be acknowledged as a violation of women's and girls' human rights, as declared in Article 5 of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Their website is worldwideweb.nonstatetorture.org, and you can find Linda on Twitter at LindaMacNST. Could you please introduce yourselves a little further and give us some details of your involvement in advocating for women's sex-based rights?
This 28 years hasn't been an easy journey. So in order for us to stay healthy, we both want to speak wherever we do. That's why we share everything that we do so that we get equal chance to use our voice. So you identified some things about us, Janet. We're both mothers as well and grandmothers, and have four little grandchildren, all girls. I have 3 and Jeanne has 1. So we have lots of girls that we're worrying about coming up as new little children in the world. So that's, of course, one of the reasons why we're here. And I wanted to explain to people, because I was listening to someone else talking about activism and how activism is not really funded. And our work has never been funded. We've always self-funded our work the 28 years, except for a rare occasion where we had someone who could afford to pay. So we just decided as feminists that we would work full-time in another job and do this job as well. And that's how we've done the work all these 28 years. Otherwise, we would probably have been silenced or had been troubled with grants and all kinds of things. So we just plugged forward. And non-state torture was a term that we coined as well. And I'm interested to hear, Jessica, that you use the term. So that's proud to say that we're supporting your life and your healing. And one of the things that came up in the work that we do is one of the persons that was tortured, the torturer was imprisoned, and he then wanted to be placed in a women's prison. And that really alerted us to how horrific it would be in prison, because we knew how he was such a very vicious torturer. To think that he would have full access to women in prison was just outrageous. That was one of the litmus points of us moving forward. But we've been very active in promoting our work around non-state torture, and that's where our primary activism has been. But as you can see, our book, Women Unsilenced, we're very clear that we're supporting women and girls, and we're not going to have that word erased for anyone. And we were active in a demonstration here in front of our own women's prison in Truro, Nova Scotia, where we live, saying that men should not be imprisoned with women ever. And some of the small things that we've done in the community is I requested the book on trans and material matters to be ordered into our library, and that was done. So I'm hoping that young people will be able to read the books and think differently, have an alternate voice. But we haven't been really vocal about same-sex, or I mean about women's sex biology as yet. But I'm sure it will come as our book keeps unfolding, as we talk to more and more people.
What made you first realize transgenderism is a threat to women's rights?
I was working on a fact sheet because Linda and I have been connected to an NGO in Vienna in around the issue of trying to raise more knowledge about non-state torture or non-state actor torture. And the only reason really that it's invisible is because for decades, since the Universal Declaration, it was always invisibilized, and women were never seen to have that right to own Article 5 that said no one should be subjected to torture. So as a consequence of that, the whole social conditioning globally has been to ignore what Jessica has said, the degree of victimization that women are subjected to. And of course, what we have found that often when we talk about torture, that people want to say, well, that's assault. Assault will do. It will not do. And as I was working on the fact sheet, I was looking at some of the research we have, and I counted 114 group who had answered the question on whether they were subjected to non-state torture in their opinion. And so I thought what I would do when I was making the fact sheet, I would pull out at least two issues that globally state torturers, it's identified that state torturers use that tactic. And one was electric shocking, and the other one was waterboarding. So in the home, waterboarding is like holding a woman or a girl in the tub underwater. I mean, we worked with a woman who her husband actually groomed her and held her captive along with three male friends who took her out of Nova Scotia to another Canadian province, put her in a room with a light bulb and nothing else, and tortured and then trafficked her into what she saw as prostitution. So he used to hold her under the tub and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, bitch, and kept putting her down, and she never knew whether she would be drowned in the tub or not. But under the 114 that I was looking at tonight, 47% of those women identified that water torture was an issue for them. And for the electric shocking, 46% identified that they were electric shocked. So that's a degree of harm that is life-threatening, and we should not at all minimize it in any way. And then I looked at a group of 30 women who said they were involved in prostitution and were tortured in prostitution by the pimps or the buyers. And what Linda and I learned with that one, that 50% of that 30, they suffered phalangia, and phalangia is the beating of the feet. And that's also another form of state torture. So the idea of minimizing violence against women that should not be addressed as torture is wrong. So it's very important that Article 8 around the degree of violence against women on this planet identifies that torture by non-state actors, which are parents, can be a father, a husband, a brother, neighbors, and they have pleasure in what they do. That's the other thing that we don't see talked about, is the pleasure that torturers have. And the women have told us, even when they were little, they knew that the torturers were having pleasure. So it's breaking the silence is really important. So as far as the transgenderism, as a nurse, it makes no sense to me when they say that biology and physiology does not matter. It absolutely matters. Outside of that, I would be practicing dangerously if I didn't keep in my mind the biology, the sex of women, and what is happening with them. So that certainly is a conversation that Linda and I have had. And the thing of tortures, whether they're state or non-state, torture can dehumanize, and actually the majority of women that have answered our questionnaire say that they were treated as non-human. So it's very important for Linda and I to acknowledge that they are women, and they deserve that right to be able to say, I am a female, I am a woman, and that's the sex that I claim. If we didn't stand firm with that, it would be like, for me, a violation of trust. They've trusted us to hear what they have to say. They've trusted us to heal, to claim their personhood, their womanhood. So I guess there's just no space for Linda and I to let go of the fact that sex-based identity is absolutely essential.
Is there an area of activity in which you focus your efforts to resist gender identity? And where has that taken you?
Jeanne and I have had a lot of discreditation about the work that we're doing around non-state torture, because when we first started back in the 90s, whenever we started telling the stories that the women were telling us about the torture that they endured, people really literally believed that we were mentally ill, that we were, crazy women of the community. And we know that because they told us years later, as we became more credible, they apologized, some of them, and admitted they really did think we were mentally ill. And that people shunned us, ran away from us. We were isolated in the community, and also had malicious complaints against us. So we've had a lot of attacks against us for standing around non-state torture. And we were always cautious to only take on one issue, because we knew that if we took on more than one, the non-state torture would become invisibilized. And then, of course, the women that we are depending on us to get the story and the reality out, they'd become invisibilized. So we never stood on the margins, excuse me, with any more than one issue. It's only been this last year that we felt, since our book is out and the issue is just so terrible around sex-based rights, that we were speaking now. Not that we didn't think it was wrong all along, but we were cautious about when the timing of it was. But on the personal level, my nieces are young feminists, and they do not agree with me at all around sex-based rights. And I had a discussion with my sister, who's a teacher, and she doesn't agree with me either. And what's happening is excuse me, there's a rift coming now in my family because of my stand around it. And it really doesn't matter to me in the end who the rift is with. I am not giving up on the reality that I'm a woman, or that my daughters is a woman, or my granddaughters are going to be women, or that any women are women in this world. And I see now in Canada, they're saying that it would be against the law, to probably to go in court and not give your pronouns. Well, if I had to go to court right now and was told that I had to give my pronouns, I would refuse. I'm not buying this. I know that there's a time when people will look back and think that this is really a very bizarre time in society, but it's just another face of patriarchy trying to use misogyny against us as women. And I'm pretty stubborn that way, or pretty determined. So I'll stand regardless of the circumstances. And that's where Jeanne and I both are.
Can you tell us a little about the opposition that you meet in your work and how this impacts you personally?
We've stayed really quite focused on the issue of non-state torture, because in 1993, when the first woman came to us, it took us into a realm of reality that really we knew nothing about. We both grew up in families with very violent fathers, and we've both as women, I as a child and Linda as a young adult, suffered sexualized violence, but we had no idea. We were working one night a week, especially in our community, to offer to the community and to individuals who had suffered, identified violence in their lives, either as children or as adults, a way to identify in a non-pathology way, because violence against women and girls is not a pathology, it's a crime. And we wanted to offer that service to the community, and that's how the woman came to us and very quickly started revealing torture. And when we looked in our country and globally, torture in the family or in intimate relationships was not anywhere to be seen. So when we went to our government to try to identify that indeed in Canada, to Canadian women and Canadian children, that torture was happening, we were met with discrimination, because they really have refused to acknowledge it. Even though they know now that it exists, they still refuse legally to acknowledge it and do something about it. So where I'm feeling the transgendered issue, it's overtaking the equality that needs to come into society to value what women do, because that idea of devaluing that women have the right to say I'm a woman is really dismissing the violence that they're suffering. And it's impacting that way. And in our book, we call it political cruelty, because I don't know how we expect women and girls to heal if they go on out into society that's trying to invisibilize them. It's another form of re-victimization immediately. They don't identify that a crime has been committed against them. We were in a workshop and one woman said, well, nobody ever told me before that I had a crime committed against me. She said, I've been for 30 years into therapy and nobody said it was a crime to begin with. And to me, when our country fails to do that, they have to be held to account. And then they come into the transgendered issue and it invisibilizes the reality even further. So I find that very distressful. But again, as a nurse, I find it distressful in the fact that they're trying to eliminate anatomy. Like if a woman says her breasts was cut or her nipple cut off, we can't call that chest, that's a breast, and that kind of language, when you've been tortured and dehumanized, and some women did not know they had skin, they did not even know they had a physical body, and then that kind of pressure tries to dehumanize them further. It's totally unacceptable for me to be a caring person to another human being who was female. And I guess, Jessica, even to support you, I'd like to say that the women in our book you had, Jessica, the sign around respect up there and dignity. The women in the book that we're giving voice to, they expect us to stand for that. And I would not think of standing any other way. So yesterday we got an email from one woman who's in the book. And I thought, because none of the women are here that are in the book with us, we're standing for them. But I thought I'd like to share what she said, because I think it's important. She's a woman. She identifies as a woman. She said, thank you. And she's emailing me, but she includes Linda. Thank you, Linda. Thank you and Linda for being my safety net all these years and sharing my voice when I was unable to directly do it for myself. The gratitude I feel for you and Linda is beyond any words I can think of. And that's, to me, why Linda and I have to stand as we do, because any other stand would invisibilize them, just like the torturers ignore them, treated them as non-human, without dignity, without voice, without thought. We just could not do that. So I guess that's how the opposition comes, trying to invisibilize, and we will resist that.
What are the next steps for you in your work? And do you have suggestions for attendees tonight?
A big intervention we did, I mentioned earlier, was our book. We wrote the book, Women Unsilenced. That's our key intervention, because people were still, I think, not getting how serious non-state torture is and what it really is. So we're hoping that when people read our book, they tell us that it finally makes sense to them when they sit down and read it all. Because, we've woven it in such a way with the theory and the research and the science and the women's stories that it's a complete package. So that's our next step, is promoting it more, making it more visible, and hopefully women in this chat or in this webinar will take a look at it. But I do think that and I'm asking women to start thinking about how many women really are tortured, because torture for women is very, very sexualized, because the sexualized torture is so pleasurable for the perpetrators that the primary MO is the sexualized torture. And that's because of our bodies. That's because of our biology, that we have breasts, that we have a vagina. And they find many ways to really destroy women's bodies, that are being tortured. So I think it's really wise that the Women's Human Rights campaign has taken a human rights focus. That's been Jeanne and my focus. And Article 5, as Jeanne mentioned, is about that no one shall be subjected to torture, and that means women and girls. And I think that by taking a human rights perspective, we're making a stand that what happens to women is a human rights violation and a crime, that we're not mentally ill, that we're not going to be pathologized because we've endured violence, whatever it is, from neglect right through to non-state torture or femicide, that none of us are mentally ill. So that just has to stop that kind of conversation. Freud created the hysteria model, and we're still living under the ramifications of that grave injustice. So I'm really pleased that that's one of the reasons why I'm so proud to be part of this group, is the human rights perspective. And for us to really keep pushing that. And Jeanne and I are going to, we have a lot of inroads in the United Nations because we've been going there since 2004. It's a long road because it's a slow process. It's still a patriarchal structure, like any structures in patriarchy are, but we are making inroads, and you find good people along the way. And so that's what I'm recommending, is for people to use the United Nations, because it takes you outside of your country, Jessica. If your country's not listening, then you can start to socially shame your country. And if enough of us work collaboratively at the United Nations globally, we should be able to make a stand about our sex-based rights and our rights as women and girls.
Jessica Williams is American-born and has lived on Noongar country in Western Australia for 11 years. She is a member of the WHRC Australia and New Zealand Working Group, founder of the WA Feminist Lobby Network, and co-convener of Single Sex Prisons WA. Jessica is a mother, wife, busy writer and published author, a successful campaigner, lobbyist and activist, and an ex-incarcerated woman, and victim survivor of non-state torture, extreme male physical and sexual violence, and obstetric and police violence. She believes in speaking up loudly against injustice, even when her voice trembles. Jessica's survival through multiple traumas and hardships over 39 years has helped shape her into the tenacious and staunch radical feminist, activist, and woman she is today. And you can read Jess's article, Just Admit You Don't Care If We Die, includes demands for change, ending male violence against women and children, on her blog. And you can find the Single Sex Prisons WA Facebook page on Facebook. Can I ask you to introduce yourself a little further and give us some details of your involvement in advocating for women's sex-based rights?
Thank you to Janet and Anna for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight about Article 8 of WHRC's Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which of course reaffirms the need for the elimination of violence against women, which is fitting because this past Thursday was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So timely presentation. As said, my name is Jessica Williams, and I've lived in Western Australia for about 11 years. I run numerous campaigns and groups, including Single Sex Prisons WA, which is currently the only group in Australia focused solely on the corrective services policies, which allow men to be housed as and with women in jails and prisons. I also started the WA Feminist Lobby Network, which was counted as a stakeholder for the WA Law Reform Commission's review of the Equal Opportunity Act, with a portion of my submission reflected in the discussion paper for the review. Our group efforts to influence the consultation and review were supported by women across Australia and the world, with hundreds of women sending in submissions. And I know some of the women in attendance tonight sent in submissions. So thank you very much for your support. The amazing women in the lobby group consistently write to state and federal politicians, as well as business owners, to advocate for the rights of girls, women, and children. I'm a writer and published author, as Janet said earlier, having used those skills to raise awareness about women's sex-based rights and threats to our rights, in particular regarding different forms of violence against women, including gender identity ideology. I wrote Just Admit You Don't Care If We Die, which includes the demands for change. I've submitted those demands to numerous state and federal representatives, and am seeing a lot of the demands being considered since my lobbying efforts began. My work has been published by Rain and Thunder Radical Feminist Journal, and shared by Feminist Legal Clinic, amongst other feminist groups and websites. And I led a nearly 3-year-long campaign, which ended successfully in August this year, with safe access zones being implemented finally in WA law, which means girls and women accessing reproductive health clinics for abortion and other services can no longer be harassed or intimidated, and neither can the staff at those clinics.
What made you first realise transgenderism is a threat to women's rights?
It happened in stages for me, quite gradually for a while, to the point where you don't realize until the end of that, but then once you're there, you can look back and see the trail that led there. But I guess a pivotal moment for me was when I was labeled transphobic purely for saying that I would always prefer a female gynecologist to perform pelvic exams on me. And I was labeled transphobic for that by a woman who considers herself a feminist. And she then proceeded to start a very vicious public, campaign against me for a couple of months, if memory serves me correctly. So that was like on that personal level, it really jolted me. With my political lobbying and activism, I really noticed that it was an issue and realized the severity of that when certain policies were implemented in WA seemingly out of nowhere. And for example, the Corrective Services Department in WA implemented a policy 1 year ago which breaches the sex-based rights of incarcerated women and girls by allowing men to be housed as and with women. And they did this at the end of the parliamentary calendar in November last year, and seemingly without really clear and transparent public consultation. So it really just came out of nowhere. We were actually really concerned about what was happening in other states, and then boom, got bit in the butt. So that's really when I stepped back and thought, we've got a serious problem here. And that actually initiated a lot of action on my end to start working against this issue in particular. And I have spoken about this issue extensively.
Where's the area that you are focusing, and where's that taken you?
I do research on and lobby about nearly everything, within that scope. And I spend a lot of time doing that. And I spend a lot of time writing, whether it's for, my blog or letters, templates, just all kinds of stuff. But I am very concerned about the lack of work in the area of incarcerated girls and women and their rights. So, and as well as being an ex-incarcerated woman myself. So I do spend a lot of time focused on that issue, as well as focusing on the issue of violence against women. And that's a very, very, wide, vast issue. But I do spend a good chunk of that focused on the ways in which gender identity ideology are worsening the already deadly issues of male violence, and also making it much more difficult to address those issues. So yeah, I do spend a lot of time in that area trying to just get information out in various ways. I would like to quickly expand on this and discuss how women and girls in WA are being routinely let down by WA officials, in particular in relation to Article 8 and gender identity ideology. And I'll start by just sharing a brief snapshot of the state of violence in Western Australia. WA had the highest rates of, quote, family and domestic violence in the country in 2018. One news article states, WA is the epicenter for the nation's domestic violence scourge, with almost 2 in 3 assaults committed by the victim's partner or relative. The extent of the state's problem is revealed in an Australian Institute of Health and Welfare report, which shows WA has the highest proportion of assaults related to family or domestic violence in the country. Unfortunately for women and girls in WA, our officials have seemingly been captured by religiously aligned ideologies regarding the existence of gender identities. And this is reflected throughout state departments and bodies and the policies thereof, making the state of violence in WA much worse. Like I mentioned earlier, we have the corrective services policies already. Our Minister for Women's Interests and Child Protection is also the Minister for the Prevention of Family and Domestic Violence. And she is seemingly captured by this religious ideology. She's been written to numerous times by multiple women expressing very serious concerns about women's and children's rights in WA, yet she continues to regurgitate the still technically illegal redefinition of woman that WA State Labor included in its plan for gender equality. Her response given even in regards to a new refuge for women and babies escaping violence. In relation to Article 8, particularly the part about states collecting accurate data to combat violence against women, WA officials are failing women in this area too. Outright lying on one's birth certificate is already allowed in this state, as it is in most places, by falsifying one's sex marker. And to make matters much worse, WA police have been identifying and processing people based on their self-identified gender rather than the sex on their birth certificate since at least 2018. On top of this, shockingly, 6 years of sexual assault email reports were recently lost by WA police. And I have some articles about that as well, if you want some more information on that, as everything I'm referencing. Furthermore, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare report that I mentioned earlier states that there are already data gaps in key areas, including for victims of violence and perpetrators of violence. So an unknown amount of false data is already circulating in WA and has been for years, while other data has been lost. When there are already data gaps in key areas, at a time when there is an urgent need for accurate and thorough data to help establish effective strategies to combat the shocking rates of violence in this state and across the country.
Can you talk a bit about the opposition that you faced and how this is impacting you?
The WA women's minister that I was referencing earlier is seemingly dodging me. I've really tried numerous different ways to get a meeting with her, and she's just not having it at the moment. And I feel like, I feel like that is her dodging some accountability on women's questions and concerns about the redefinition of woman and the connected loss of sex segregated spaces and services and rights for women and girls in WA. So that's frustrating. There are other politicians and business owners who are hesitant to speak about this or meet, and they shut down discussions immediately if we do meet, even if you have, really important information, really time sensitive information, just urgent information, because I feel like a lot of this is extremely urgent. They shut those conversations down, and it's very frustrating. I have lost connections with people, a lot of people that I thought were friends and that I thought would be able to think critically, particularly about something that seems so obvious. But I do constantly have to remind myself that I was there at some point and was confused and manipulated by other people to believe malarkey. So I do have to remind myself of that. But yeah, it's when you see people that you respect and that just falling to the wayside over this stuff, it's troubling. it's really troubling. I've had men in my private messages demanding that, I say trans women are women, telling me what I can and cannot say, even going as far as telling me where I can and cannot go locally so that they do not have to be around a transphobic bigot. And I have had to actually be physically around some of those men that sent those messages to me at events. And look, you know, I felt okay that I wasn't going to be physically assaulted because it was someone that, I'm just gonna be honest, I felt I could take. but it absolutely messed with my mental health and my anxiety, because I already have high levels of that because of past trauma and everything. So I have had to deal with several instances similar to that. And as I referenced, you know, lightly mentioned earlier, I've had women lead very public and private hate campaigns against me for being transphobic and a bigot because of my right to what happens to my body, and things like that. So yeah, I've had a lot of stress, high amounts of stress on the public and private levels for the work I do from all different angles.
What are the next steps for you and your organisations? And do you have suggestions for WHRC attendees?
So I'm currently lobbying federal politicians regarding women and girls that are escaping sexual violence and the demands for change. I've been doing that for, I think, around 2 years now on the demands for change. So still pursuing that. And I'm committed to continuing my work nurturing a devoted feminist lobby network in WA. We've really had, you know, some really nice success so far. I have started, this is aligned with what Jeanne and Linda are doing and have been doing for so long. I've started an international network for the rights of incarcerated girls and women. And part of what we do is just supporting each other in the work that we're doing in our, you know, in our locations, in our areas, because there are so few women working on this issue. And we will be joining together to advocate for the rights of incarcerated girls and women on the international level, particularly with the United Nations. So watch that space. And we definitely want others to join us that are interested in devoting time to some of the most traumatized and vulnerable women on the planet, incarcerated women. So if you are interested in getting involved with that, reach out to me, and I can, if you're not in Australia, I can direct you to the closest country contact, or, you know, go from there. I will continue to lobby politicians about everything, whether related to gender nonsense or not. And I will continue to share my skills with other women and other activists, and do what I can to not only raise awareness about our rights and threats to our rights and what can be done about it, but also to influence younger women and show them that there is a feminism out there that does not seek to destroy their safety and their privacy and their rights. So that's very important to me. And lastly, just to close, I want to say that although the state of violence in Western Australia is truly appalling, and has been for a while, the number of women taking action to address it is growing, and so is our momentum and our dedication to these issues, as well as our determination. And I think that is definitely echoed across Australia and across the world. So yeah, just keep fighting for the elimination of all forms of violence against women and children. That is what I will be doing. Thank you.